Okay, it's the top of the hour, so we'll get started. Welcome to our January webinar, where we're going to be looking at making the most of your Meetoo surveys. I'm Dermot, and this is Amy, and we're from the customer success team here at Meetoo. So say hi, Amy.
Morning, all.
Okay, so as always, please do connect to Meetoo for the session. I've already given some instructions out, but they're there on screen. We want to be running a few polls to get some data from you. As well as hopefully you asking us some questions throughout the session. So please use those instructions there. You can download Meetoo for your iOS or Android device, the native app, or you can access the web app at web.meetoo.com. And our all-important meeting ID for the session is 129362064. Now we can see that we've got quite a few people attending the webinar this morning, so I just want to make sure that you all have a chance to actually get onto Meetoo. So what we've done is we've actually put our instructions on every slide, so hopefully anybody that joins late can also see those instructions and access the session. So please get on now so we can get cracking. Okay, a little look at the agenda. So over the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to be looking at the importance of asking the right questions in your survey. We're going to be sharing some of our tips to ensure that your participants actually complete your survey. And then the final section is how to maximise the value of your survey data. Okay, so if we stick to time, we'll also have a bit of a section of Q&A at the end. So we shall hopefully get your questions in for that. And so please, do connect to Meetoo to be able to participate there. But before we go into it all, as usual, we'd like to ask a few polls. So please make sure you've got your Meetoo apps ready. And our first question is: have you conducted a survey previously as part of your session? So any kind of session, whether that's a business meeting, a class or lecture, a training session, or a conference or event. So yes, you regularly do conduct surveys, you occasionally do. No, but you're interested in doing it potentially in the future, or no, you don't need them in your sessions. If anybody puts number 4, Amy, I'll be quite surprised.
We'll convert you.
Yeah, hopefully, yes. So okay, we'll just give you a couple of seconds to finish that question. Okay, that's great. We'll take our results there. Okay, occasionally. Okay, so that's good. So hopefully we've got everybody on the positive side, and we'll, hopefully after this session, you'll all be looking to use them more often. Our next question is specifically around Meetoo. So have you actually used a Meetoo survey yet? Yes, you have. No, but you intend to soon. No, you don't have access with your particular license. So that's for the free educational customers. Or no, you're not interested in Meetoo surveys. And again, that would be a surprising one, but you never know. People could be in the wrong place. Okay, that was a good one. We've got everybody to complete that one quite quickly. Brilliant. That's a great result from our point of view, isn't it, Amy?
So that's very good.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Okay, thanks for that, everybody. I'd now like to hand over to Amy to set the scene a little bit.
Thanks, Dermot. So as a few of you have used Meetoo surveys already, which is great, but not all of you have. So we just wanted to introduce and frame it before we look at guidance in how to make the most of the feature. So Meetoo surveys were introduced in October last year, and they've already gone through a round of improvements which was gathered from customer feedback. If you haven't seen this feature as yet, it allows you to ask self-paced questions of your participants so that they can answer your questions in their own time. So whether that be before, during, or after your session. When people think surveys, they think long, boring, and no benefit, or at least I tend to. But maybe that's just because I'm from a background of market research. Meetoo surveys, however, are designed to be short, simple, and instant to draw your insight from. They are an extension to an engaging meeting, class, or training session where you're most likely already utilising the Meetoo polling and hopefully the Q&A as well. Meetoo surveys can be a very successful way of capturing important additional information from your participants, particularly as they're an audience that you're already engaged with. For workplace customers, this feature can be accessed but is limited for testing within the free account. And for education customers, as Dermot mentioned, you do require an upgrade, or if you are part of an institutional plan with us, you'll be able to utilise this feature in full as well. So now that we've set the scene, let's take a look at our first agenda item, the importance of asking the right questions. We designed this advice to be applied to any survey method or platform you use, not just Meetoo Surveys, and should hopefully help you form some better thinking when conducting a survey. So the first thing we need to do is understand what we want from our data. It's a step that we're all guilty of skipping, but it means we focus ourselves on what we want to achieve from a survey. So don't start with, oh, it'd be nice to know this and this. Start with, what am I going to use this data to prove or monitor, and work backwards from that. Linked to knowing what you want from your data is thinking in advance how you want to analyse it. Are you going to want to compare male and female responses or split people by age? If this is important, you need to either ask these questions or merge the data in afterwards. So something just to consider. So point 3, there's a few things to consider with wording for your survey questions. Firstly, it's easy to create a question and not realise it's biased. For instance, how positive do you feel about Me Too? We've already biased your thinking to believe you feel positive. So let's reword that to, how do you feel about Me Too? The same applies to your responses. Make sure it's a balanced scale, so the same number of positive and negative options in that scale. Also consider, does it need a don't know, a none, or an other option? Wording should be appropriate for your audience. So for instance, talking to professionals, don't use childish language and vice versa. And also important, keep it short, clear and easily understandable for your audience. Point 4, pick the right questions to ask. Don't ask too many. Stay focused and you'll meet your objectives in less questions. Plus, the more questions you ask, the less likely all will be to answer those questions, as you'll lose people's attention. Point 5, remember, if you ask for feedback related to your session, people will want and expect improvements based on that feedback. So be prepared to implement change based on the feedback. Otherwise, really, why ask it in the first place? We can now take a look at agenda item 2. So tips to ensure participants complete your survey. And Dermot's going to take us through the first few now.
Thanks very much, Amy. So, as you can imagine, we've got quite a long list of tips, but we've tried to keep these down to the ones that we feel are going to be most useful and relevant to using Meetoo Surveys, as well as a couple of the other tools that you might be using. So, the first one is encourage responses and explain how all that information is going to be used if you want people to really complete that survey. It will get their buy-in and therefore improve your response rate, as Amy's mentioned. You can include some detail in the survey description of Meetoo Surveys, but it is always good to reinforce that verbally during your session. Nothing works better than the host actually encouraging people verbally. Tip number 2, keep the number of questions to a minimum, as Amy's mentioned, but keep all your content simple. You know, long questions tend to put people off, and also they don't get read properly all the time. The same applies to long option lists. If your list of options is really long, you might consider actually using an open text type question to actually allow people to submit their own thoughts. Although there isn't a limit to the length that you can have for a survey, our Meetoo surveys are designed to be short and simple to get the most feedback. Number 3 is about using a progress bar. Now, this really helps to set the expectations and allow your participants to monitor progress. So you can see in Meetoo Surveys, we actually update the participants on where they are as they go through. You can see in this example, the respondent has answered 0 of 3 questions. But we've also done some colour coding on the notification badge that's actually in the menu tab, Red means that you haven't looked at a survey that's been made available. Orange means that you've looked at it or started it. And then no badge means that you've either completed the survey that's available or there is no action required at all. Okay, then number 4, choose the right question type. We've already mentioned a couple of different question types, but for instance, remember that if you're asking an open question, you are going to have to read and code up all of those responses if you are going to analyse it. It might be more applicable in some instances to use a multiple choice question, as it is far easier to analyse all that data, particularly at scale, as open text responses can be a long and arduous task to actually code up. If you are using open text, it does provide really valuable information, but just consider how you are going to use that data afterwards. Don't use too many different scales. So Amy already mentioned this a little bit, but just to go into a bit more detail, try to reuse the same scales where possible. It really allows people to understand their choices easier and actually complete your survey a lot quicker. It also speeds up the creation of your survey. We've built in a functionality to actually duplicate each question. That's the icon on the right hand side there. You can duplicate your questions. You can also duplicate surveys, which means you can just go through and amend individual pieces as you go through.
Thanks, Dermot. So tip number 6, it can be effective to call a survey a quiz, and I think quite timely someone in the chat, Ralph, has asked a question about this. If appropriate to your audience, you could call it a quiz, as it can increase completion rates and improve people's attention to detail, meaning more accurate data. If competition is involved, if competition is involved or even hinted to, people naturally want to get the right answer. You can set correct answers in the Meetoo dashboard so that you can view the results after the session. If the session is being run anonymously, you could then make the results available, if it's not being run anonymously, you could make the results available after the session. And the Meetoo exports really do help you identify the top scorers, but also any sort of flagging respondents, students there for you, as shown up on screen now. So tip 7. If you can find time, get your participants to complete the survey within the session. It really does maximise the response rates. People are most engaged when they're in your session, and once they've walked out the room, you'll lose their attention. Response rates will be lower if your survey is asked before or after a session. So tip 8, if emailing your participants before or after a session, you can send a direct link to your Meetoo survey. So this helps people or your participants or students access the survey in one click. So take the web app link, so that's web.meetoo.com, then append your session ID. And if keeping it anonymous, you can also append the word survey to the end to take them directly into the survey tab as shown on screen there. So a nice little tip there. Tip 9, make the survey accessible on all devices and optimise for those devices. Most platforms now do this, but it is important to make sure it's accessible to as many people as possible. Our final tip, tip 10, share part or all of your results afterwards where appropriate to encourage completion. This will depend on your topic, but it's a nice little incentive that can increase your response rates. I think now we're going to move into section 3, how to maximise the value of our survey data, which Dermot's going to take us through.
Thanks very much, Amy. So, if you've been asking the right questions, as we talked about earlier, you should be getting good and valuable data from your surveys. However, there are a few ways that we can talk about to help you squeeze just a little bit more value from those survey outputs. So the first one is that deep analysis. In-depth interrogation of that data can be used to really highlight some trends or exceptions throughout your responses. And some people might use some bespoke business intelligence software to do that. But you can just do it the old-fashioned way like we do using Excel. Cross-tabulation, now this is something that Amy mentioned briefly earlier, but it is a much more simple approach. And it's done just by cutting responses by some demographic splits. Now, if you've identified your respondents, then you may already know that information. However, if you're using an anonymous survey or you don't have all that information about people, you might just want to ask a couple of profiling questions at some point throughout your survey to actually capture that. Just be careful not to ask too many profiling questions or ones that are too narrow, because that can put people off as they feel that they are actually being identified, even if their expectation is that they should be remaining anonymous. We then talk about consistency. You can actually ask the same questions to different groups of people during different sessions to really increase that comparable data pool. We've built in the export and import feature that you can use on Meetoo Surveys to be able to do this without having to recreate the survey every time, or indeed all of your questions. But what you can do is, once you've imported it into your new session, you can make some tweaks or add or remove questions to make them a bit more specific and relevant to whatever meeting or session you're actually running. The next point is to react quickly. So, this is a really, really easy way to ensure that your data is valuable and, by using it as quickly as possible. The older that your data gets, the less relevant it is, and therefore the less valued it actually holds. This was one of the things that was actually in our team's minds when they were designing the survey functionality of Meetoo. So what you can actually see is you can get live updates of what's happening in your survey through the Meetoo dashboard. And you can see in the screen grab we've got there, we can actually see the number of respondents that have started completing a particular survey, which allows you in real time to encourage people more if you've got quite a low response rate. But what you can also do is you can actually see the responses updating live individual questions, as you can see in the bottom right hand corner there. So that will really allow you to make informed decisions on the fly as you go through. Now that this is certainly something that you can't do if you're deploying a paper survey, but even some online tools actually don't allow you to have this kind of real-time data. Then look at the timing. So Amy touched upon this briefly, but put your feedback survey live just at the end of the session and not at the beginning. Because otherwise you're going to end up capturing opinions of people before you've actually delivered that content. We know from experience that people will start to fill in those feedback forms at the very beginning of your session just so that they can get it done. And actually what they're not doing then is providing you with accurate and valuable data because they're submitting their responses before you've said anything. But with that in mind, we've just opened our very short feedback survey, and we'd really appreciate it if you could complete that either during or after our Q&A session, which, in keeping with our time, we're about to start now. So hopefully you've been submitting some content through Meetoo.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of questions, or some actual comments and sharing some tips here. Brilliant. So Kellyanne's already sort of shared how she can see using Meetoo Surveys, which is great. I know that she's already using the polling feature because we've talked to her in the past. So at the end of each lecture, I post a slide with study questions for students to use for self-study. The survey tool seems like it would work well for this, and definitely agree. Using it for sort of self-assessment post your lecture would be a great way of using the Meetoo Surveys.
Yeah, Ralph has asked a great question, and I think you touched on it just as Ralph put the question in, but can you use Meetoo Surveys as a quiz or testing tool for self-paced testing rather than live? Yes, absolutely. Amy did mention it. The correct answer feature that is part of the live polling of Meetoo is also available in survey questions, so you can certainly do that. And then our very useful report does that conditional formatting and the colour coding to give you a very quick overview of how much people know about a particular subject, and you've also got a very easily produced leaderboard there as well.
We've got a question from Ricky. Really, really good question actually. Is it possible to leave a survey open once the session is over, so for a few days to gather feedback on an event and post-analysis? Yes, you can definitely leave your survey open. Just make sure you leave your session also in play mode. So I guess the one catch there is that if you are running another session, you will have to stop that session to start another. So it's just something to consider. if you do want to start another session, it will stop that survey, but you can leave that survey open as long as you keep that session or meeting ID open.
Ricky's asked another question. Thanks, Ricky. It's a really good one here. So I like the idea of sending out a survey at the end of sessions, but also during lunch breaks too. How can I make sure that people actually fill these out? So again, it just goes back to the encouragement, and there's a few channels that you can use for encouragement. You can post host messages on the Meetoo Q&A board, but as we mentioned earlier, nothing works better than actually that verbal encouragement from whoever's delivering the session, and just keep reminding people to actually do it.
Another idea, you could just pop it on a PowerPoint slide, leave it up on screen while people wander off to lunch, and hopefully they'll come back from lunch a little bit early, see it up on screen and be reminded, oh yes, I haven't completed it yet.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. So it could be another way to do that.
That's brilliant. And in keeping with our advice, I can see that a couple of people have started filling in our feedback survey, but obviously not everybody yet. Hopefully that's because you're all typing away on some questions. But please make sure you do fill in our feedback form, because it is really useful for us to help actually improve these sessions.
Yeah.
We'll leave this open, and we'll come back to any questions if any more come in. But I think we can just move on to a couple of other bits in terms of some webinars. So we are running some more webinars coming up, and I'll just let Amy talk through those while I post out some links into the Meetoo feed.
Sure. So next month we have a webinar on employee engagement with a dispersed workforce. That's very much towards the workplace sector rather than the education sector, and obviously those involved in internal comms and employee engagement. And in March we have the essential venue technology tips, how to choose the right venue for your next event. So that again is more events focused in the workplace, but I'm sure, to be honest, that will probably have some great tips for all sectors if you do use external venues. Every week we run a free Jumpstarter webinar. So the Jumpstarter webinar is a getting started webinar, so a 30-minute session just to get you started in the Meetoo dashboard. And that tends to be run by myself or Dermot or someone else in the team. And that's every Tuesday, either at 10 or at 3 p.m. It alternates the timing of that each week. So please do join that, and you can join that through the link at the bottom of this page. We also have the What's New, What's Next in Meetoo. So if you are a regular attendee of our sessions, you'll know or have been to one of these sessions. We have one coming up at hopefully at the end of February, I think. So that will be posted on our webinars page as soon as the date is set. And that's obviously to tie in with a release. So we do have a release coming up, which means you will be getting some more new features very soon.
Brilliant. And just a note on those two upcoming February and March webinars. The February one, we've got Richard Taylor from Lumi, who's going to come and present for us about that. Richard is the CEO of Lumi, and as such, a global business has the real problem of actually keeping a dispersed workforce engaged. And then the March one, we've actually got Kevin McLaughlin from 1 Wimpole Street, who's going to come and talk to us about how to choose the right venue. So, really exciting. We've got these guest presenters coming up. And then, as always, please, we ask that you leave us a Trustpilot review. It helps us focus the development of Meetoo and also helps spread the word of it. And also our YouTube channel, as Amy's mentioned, we use our YouTube channel a lot. The recording of this will be up there and all our other webinars. So please make sure that you go on and actually subscribe to that as well. And those links I've just posted out to the Meetoo feed. Okay, well, I think that's it. We're just about on time. Hopefully that's been an interesting session for you. We hope to see you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Cheerio.
Bye.